3 tournaments, all the same format in 5 days. I'll do my best to get you ready for all of them. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to FECast episode 77, all about Hour of Glass Expedition. I am your host, Sunyveil, and this will be a solo cast as Stormblessed is currently doing real-life things that need to get done. So, as you probably know, this cast is being recorded on Wednesday night. It's probably being released on Thursday. Friday, there is a Tuesday night Eternal. This is Friday, July 30th. It also is the beginning of the Expedition Open for Hour of Glass. That's going throughout this weekend. And then on August 3rd, which is the Tuesday following, there will be another Expedition tournament. So, as is what this cast usually does, we're going to try to get you ready for those tournaments with as much information about Expedition as we possibly can. And by we, I really just mean me, because I'm the only one here tonight. This would normally be the part of the show that I ask whoever else is on the cast how they're doing, but I guess we should just get straight into stuff you need to know for this weekend. So the first thing that you probably need to know is that Diabolic Machinations is bugged. We were looking for a bug fix patch yesterday or today maybe, but none have come out so far. And right now, Diabolic Machinations is playing like its non-nerf version of itself. And I'm going to go ahead and talk as if Diabolic Machinations is working the way it's intended to, and you have to pay 2 life instead of 1 life per amplify. But if it does not behave in the way that it's supposed to, that does definitely have implications for the tournament. The Diabolic Machinations deck becomes a whole lot more viable. And even though Sinister Rumors can pretty much take care of it, it's still, it might be a deck that you can play. In any case, today, the first thing I'm going to do is to go over all the cards that we talked about last week on the cast and just update you with any information or new evaluations I have for the cards. Then I'm going to go over the pillars of the Expedition format, as Stormblessed always loved to do, and where perhaps the format might be a little weak or a little soft. Then after that, I'm going to go over the various decks that I've seen in the format, and the format is still kind of up in the air. It hasn't solidified that much so far. So you could see anything during these tournaments and you shouldn't be too surprised, but I have an idea on some strategies that may be more prevalent than others. And then finally, I'm going to end it off with possible ways to counterplay to big pieces and how the balance of the format may be shifted depending on what is popular and ways that you could perhaps attack the format. The first thing on the agenda, of course, is reevaluating the cards that we looked at last week on our Hour of Glass full set review. So while many of these cards, I have basically the same evaluation of them, some of them have changed quite a bit. Now, the first one is Styre's Eyes. I don't think Styre's Eyes is going to be that great for this tournament. It's possible that the Adjudicator's Gavel you get is good enough against Feln Davia decks that it might be something that you want, that is valuable early on, but I just feel like there aren't the synergies you want with Styre's Eyes. There's no Trickshot Ruffian in order to get a lot of damage through in the air. There aren't very powerful Valkyrie synergies. There are fewer ways to abuse cards like Lingering Influence or Crown Watch Tactic in the format right now. So while Styre's Eyes is still a very efficient card, I don't really see a great spot for it right now in the current metagame and in decks that I expect to be good. So that's the first one. I still do think that it's going to be a very good card in Throne, but we're not talking about Throne today. It's worth mentioning that League Explorer is very, very good. At least it has been in my playing so far. So I was high on it before, and I am still high on it. Jada Peacekeeper is a card that I was very low on, but I actually think that this card is much better than I initially thought it would be. I said that it was a Punisher card and it was hard to get the right mode of it. Your opponent had a lot of agency in what would happen, and I didn't consider fully what would happen if you put it in a. I mean, this is very dependent on the setting. And what will often happen is you play Jada on 3, it either gums up the board or can attack in for 4. And then instead of the late game pattern of just attacking and running into a blocker or like a double block where they eat it when their sigil is not very useful, what often happens with this is that you can play an Argo Ironthorn. That's the 5 cost soldier that stuns for each soldier you have. Jada is a soldier, so it adds to that count. And then you get an attack in, and then when Argo attacks, Jada gets double damage, and you get to do a ton of damage to the opponent. So this card, I mean, I think in most applications, my evaluation hasn't changed, but the way the play pattern of the soldiers deck makes me think that it's quite a bit better than I had initially thought. So I think this is a great card for the soldiers deck. And I was not really a believer before. Another card, Iron Ursa. I think I'm leaning toward this card being the real deal. It's just a huge thorn in the side. For the control deck, the Feln deck, having a lot of cards that you want to play at fast speed, this could be a problem. So I think that card is good. Varbuk, Hand of Anarchy. This is the 4-cost 4/3 with Charge Valor, summon, kill an enemy multi-faction unit or relic. I don't think that there are going to be that many multi-faction cards, and we'll talk about, I keep on saying we, because that's what I'm used to saying, but really, I'll talk about some of the multi-faction cards that I think you might see in this format, and there really aren't that many. And in the decks that I think have targets on their back, there's only really one card that you're really looking to hit with Varbuk. Kehanya, that's the Elysian 2/4. I have not seen this be played much at all. I haven't tried it, but I just don't think it fits in the Elysian deck. I think, like, if you're going to play Elysian, you probably want to play Stealth, in which case you have a glut of cards to play at the 3-drop slot anyway, and this doesn't make the cut. And finally, Azendel Masterbind. I think that this card is reasonably good, but it can be disrupted by just like Permafrost, which is a really easy way to disrupt something that you're paying 5 power for. So, still a powerful effect, but I think it's easier to deal with than I had initially thought. Alright, so that's it for card reevaluations. Moving on, let's talk about the pillars of the format. The current Expedition format is dominated by a few cards or strategies that look to capitalize on these cards. The first of which I think will come to no surprise to nobody, hopefully none of these are a surprise to anyone, is Davia. Davia is just so powerful. It has an incredible amount of flexibility based on, whatever spells that you've played that game. And in addition, once it's in play, it is a threat to end the game quickly by attacking. It attacks for 6, which isn't a ton, but like it's not nothing either. And it also does a great job of controlling the board if it's like just permafrosted or something because of its ability to consistently stun units. So obviously you don't use that unless you're out of gas, but when you are out of gas, this is a great way of just contesting the board. Davia, well, she really does everything once you get up to 7. She helps you stabilize, she controls the board, and she closes out the game. And I don't think it would really be a stretch to say that's the strongest card in Expedition. So yeah, Davia, very good card. The second card is Mandevilla, Ambitious Mandevilla. And that is the Mandrake that kills something upon entering, and it's really the best removal in this format, and that's partially because of the weakness of other removal. But if you're playing against an aggro deck, for example, Ambitious Mandevilla is just such a beating. It kills something and helps stabilize after it's in play, and it's also something that you can recur. If you have the Sinister Rumors, yes, that's the name of the card, you can buy it back and play it again. Although, oftentimes it doesn't survive the second time. Again, this might be having more to do with the fact that the removal in the format just isn't very good, and Mandevilla is like pretty good amidst a sea of not very good removal, but it's also just a nightmare for aggro decks to deal with. And there's not a ton of Aegis in the format, so you can be pretty sure that you get to kill something. The next pillar of the format is Dovid and all the soldiers that Dovid brings. Perhaps Argo Ironthorn might be a better unit to put in here, but Dovid is just, I mean, it's as good as we thought it would be. It's a 4/4 that draws cards, and the drawback is very, very slow. The 2/1s just don't matter as quick as they probably should for this card. So Dovid's still attacking and blocking a lot and drawing cards and doing great things for soldier decks. And finally, the last pillar of the format is Houndmaster, along with its suite of mono fire cards, or I guess aggressive fire cards, trying to empty out your hand as quickly as possible in order to make free 4/4s and just get really far ahead on board. It's also worth noting that in this format, there is not a lot of Relicate. I think one of the best answers to Relicate is Evolving Oldzeal, the 5-cost 5/3 with Summon, Transform, or Relic, or Sight. And I don't think that card is that great. It's not embarrassing by any means. Like, I think that decks can play it, but it's not great as relic removal, and it's just not a card that you love to have 4 of. It's not great in multiples. You only ever really want to play 1, is what I've found. So if that's the best relic hate, that means that relics are pretty likely to stick around, especially if they're single faction. So that might be something worth considering if you are looking to find a lane in this format that can be exploited. Some examples of relics that I think could have a big impact on this format are Waxing Moon, Ring of Glamour, and Bastion Garrison, which is the card that makes soldiers, that gives soldiers +1/+1 and gives you a bonus each time you amplify. So all of those relics are pretty difficult to deal with and can play a large role in the game if you can figure out how to do a good job of building around them. Okay, so those are the pillars of the format and the cards that you should expect to see a lot of and strategies that you should expect to see a lot of. Well, how do they fit into decks? Well, that is the next section, and I will go over a bunch of decks that I think will definitely make a showing. Well, it'll range from definitely make a showing to probably will make a showing or maybe will make a showing. So let's start with the obvious. There's soldiers, and some people are playing 3-faction soldiers, and I just think that's asking to lose games to your power base that are not necessary. I think that in the long run, you're just going to lose more because you're trying to play 3 factions and play Kifos rather than just stick to 2-faction. There are a lot of good soldiers in just Huru, and I think the deck should just play Huru, use Dovid, use Argo Ironthorn, and just use that to kill people. And I think it's plenty. I think it's enough. You've got plenty of bodies that you're happy to put in the deck. You have plenty of spells to interact that you're happy to play. There's just like no real need to branch into a 3rd faction and risk losing to your own power base or otherwise slow yourself down or anything else that comes with trying to play a 3rd faction in Eternal. The power bases in this format are not that good. I think it's not impossible to play 3 factions, but I want to really avoid it if I can, and with soldiers, I certainly can. By the way, I will post a soldiers example deck list. It is not tuned. none of the decks that I've been playing are terribly tuned, but it is a good example that you can go off of where I think the deck should be starting out if you're interested in that. The next deck is good old Feln. We all know a ton about Feln, right? I mean, it plays Davia, it plays Mandevilla, it controls the game and then ends up winning. Now, what can I say about Feln that might be useful for anyone that already is familiar with it? I don't think that Evolving Oldzeal is very good in it. It might be a necessity to answer opposing relics, because in Feln that's just always a problem and Reappropriator doesn't really cut it. But I think that this deck really risks getting caught up with too many expensive cards in its hand when it really just needs to stabilize and then get to Davia. And then once you play a Davia, you should be able to win from there. Just going Davia into Wisdom of the Elders is incredible if you have the board clear. If you play the Ruination, the one that destroys, that kills all units, I think it's pretty easy to go that into Davia and just feel fine. Davia draw more cards. This is a deck that I actually really like Sinister Rumors in. You don't play a ton of early units. You get to use the mode of the card that kills an exhausted enemy unit. So that is good for helping control the board. And then also rebuying a Mandevilla late in the game, or just really any unit. If you get to defile something, you can rebuy one of those units, and that's not bad. So I definitely like a few Sinister Rumors. Probably don't want to max out on it, as is always the case with like Dark Return effects. Not the best in multiples. There is the debate of whether you should play 3-faction or 2-faction. I like Vinegrafter in this format, and if you're playing Vinegrafter, you can't really afford to have a short hopper market. Obviously, if you're playing a 3rd faction, you're basically just playing that for short hopper. I like erring on the side of making sure you can play your cards. I think that's where I want to be. I'm not currently playing any 4-drops. That might not be right, but I don't think you want to play that many 4-drops. If you're playing for a short hopper, that definitely, changes the equation. It's really powerful to go short hopper privilege of rank into eventually rebuy something with short hopper, but it is slow, and I don't think that the short hopper body is something that you're really interested in. Your units are so much better than that between Mandevilla and Davia and even Grafter. I mean, if fire aggro is a thing, Grafters can be a really big pain for them. And then I think that the options in the Grafter market are pretty reasonable as well. Oh yes, and there's one more card in Feln that people like, and that's Diabolic Might. I don't really like this card. I mean, granted that I don't like big units, it can be pretty obvious that I'm not going to like this card. Yeah, if you play Torgov and they permafrost it and then you follow it up with Diabolic Might, that's fantastic. But I mean, in something that's not a best case scenario, I don't think it's that good. If you're playing Davia to draw 6, I just think that's probably unnecessary. I mean, Davia into Wisdom of Elders is a lot of cards and a lot of things to do with your power. Maybe you can't necessarily find the right one, but boy, I feel like Might is not necessary, and that's another benefit of playing the short hopper deck, is you probably get better access to Might. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan. Okay, next on the list is Fire Aggro. I think Fire Aggro is extremely potent, and there's a number of cards. The exact number is certainly debatable, but there are a lot of cards that are all in fire that work with a lot of different factions. I think you can pair it with any other faction and have some amount of success for a fire-based aggro deck. So just going off my list here, I think Char, Raging Jackal, Danglo, Houndmaster, Flashfry, League Explorer, Rocket Blaster, D'Angelo Strongarm, and Daheen Blitz make up an excellent core. I mean, that's already most of your deck without playing any multi-faction cards or cards of purely another faction. The interaction between Rocket Blaster and League Explorer has been pretty good for me. Also using Fire Sketch to get additional Amplify relics for Rocket Blaster, that's worked out really well for me so far. The 3-drop slot is definitely a bit light, as is, I guess, the 4-drop slot. Basically, you just have a lot of 2-drops that you're really happy with. But I've liked the Urn of Choking Embers that Strongarm creates. It's really a pain. And I didn't even mention Mid-Chief Salus, which is another option, of course. But it requires a heavy commitment to fire, making sure, and as I said, the power base is not great in this format. I suspect the best way to pair fire is actually with Primal. I know playing Varbuk seems appealing, but we really haven't talked about many multi-faction cards that you want to hit with Varbuk yet. But there's definitely appeals to almost all factions, but I think that Primal does a pretty good job of shoring up Fire's weaknesses. You get Permafrost, which can answer big things, and you get the Prowling Amarok, which gets Aegis, which is something that you just don't have access to in Fire. If you play time, you get access to Amphitheater, but I've been really underwhelmed by Amphitheater lately. It really shines against combo decks, and without Overloader combo being in the mix, it's not really there. And of course, Reanimator isn't really a thing in Expedition. I've had a lot of success with Stone Scar. Also, you get another premium 2-drop in Skullbreaker. You also get to play a market with Vinegrafter, but the market option in the aggro deck is not that great. Vinegrafter, it just isn't a fantastic aggro card. So, that's an option. You can also play Justice, of course. You get some flyers. You get some... I don't know. You get Farbrook. That's a big deal, but not too much else aside from that. I do like Daheen Blitz. It's a way to utilize your market space, so that's pretty cool. All right, the next deck on my list here is Valkyries. I've seen some amount of Valkyries. Stars Tower has been nerfed, but if you can get it off at 5, especially if you can warp it, it's still very powerful. Valkyries just has like a bunch of cards that are pretty okay, and if you get a lot of Valkyrie warps, then you end up with a huge advantage. But individually, I'm not that thrilled about the deck. I feel like a lot of the time you're probably just waiting to lose against something like Feln. I think that's pretty difficult for the Valkyries deck to deal with. It is nice that all the units fly, and any deck that's trying to like gum up the board is not going to have a good defense for it. But like against soldiers, I think you're just slower and you don't have lifesteal to really swing the race. And against Feln, I think you're just waiting to get swept or something. So not a gigantic fan of Valkyries, although it is there if you like the mechanic Valkyrie Warp. I've seen some stealth decks see play. This is relying on the power of the relic Ring of Glamour, which says when you play a unit with stealth, draw a card. After the third, sacrifice it to gain 3 health. I've seen people draw a lot of cards with this one, and it's pretty difficult to deal with if you're not playing Varbruk. So you get to play a few accelerants, and then you just go to town trying to outvalue people. Reflector into any big unit, Hidden Crusader, Frontline Healer, just stay alive until you can just bury them in card advantage. I don't love it as a strategy, but there's no question that Ring of Glamour is difficult to deal with, and it draws a ton of cards. That is something worth noting. I've seen some shadow versions of this that also play Azendil, and also there's a removal spell that draws you a card if you have a card that's stealthed, and that might be worth it, although I'm not sure. I don't know. I feel like this deck is clunky, and it will beat decks that aren't tuned, but if decks are tuned, this will have a lot of problems because you're just playing a lot of units that cost 3 and 5. I've talked about that at length. So yeah. All right, the next archetype on my list here is Xenan Ramp. I've seen people try to get quick Azendels off, and that's pretty good if you can get an Azendel off, but the fact that it's weak against Permafrost, I think, really hinders it. So I don't think this is going to be a huge player. Maybe in the right matchup, it could shine. You do get to play 8 1-cost accelerants for Azendel. Trying to play Azendel on 3, and Azendel on 3 is pretty good. But, like, I don't know, you don't have fantastic ramp targets outside of that. Even as good as Azendil is, it's not like World Bear Behemoth that just totally takes over the game if you get to attack with it multiple times. So I'm not huge on Xenan Ramp. And the other thing about that is that even getting up to Valiant Guardian, which is an absolutely huge unit, it dies to Mandevilla, which is one of the best removal spells in the format. And it also gets, stalled for a turn by Vinegrafter, which is not a good thing either. Next on my list, I've seen some Mandrakes decks play. This one uses the new Mandrake that copies things, Mimicry Vine. It's the 3-cost double shadow, 3/3 stealth, and when one of your units uses ultimate or summon, you can reveal it in order to get those effects again. So this into Ambitious Mandevilla is pretty good. There's all sorts of like ultimates or reveal cards when you that do something after you stealth them that are kind of interesting with it, but without the Merriest Mandrake and without like a really strong sense of tribe synergy, I don't know. It has a lot of problems that decks that play a lot of units have, and that's like if your synergies get disrupted, you're in trouble. If your opponent deploys faster than you and you stumble, you're in a lot of trouble. So like I I feel like the deck has some issues, even though like it can look really cool when it's working. All right, the next one uses Waxing Moon, and I'm not sure if this is a 2-faction or a 3-faction deck, but oh boy, Waxing Moon with Auto Tread kills a lot of things. Waxing Moon, of course, is the 4-cost relic that says your units have deadly at the end of the enemy turn. Transform Waxing Moon into Waning Moon, which lets you draw an extra card. So it's really interesting that this card gives you like the most benefit as quick as possible. You both get deadly units for a turn, and you get to draw the card on the next turn. Although after that, your units are not deadly for a turn. But like this card is very good. It's difficult to remove relics, and this one likes being in play for a long time. So I could see this being a pretty good strategy if you can control the board and just land Waxing Moons and just draw extra cards, somehow stay alive, maybe Ambitious Mandevilla to keep up with the damage that you take from drawing extra cards, and then just ping stuff if you can. There aren't a ton of ways to ping. There's Auto Tread, which is very good. There's also Rocket Blaster, which I think is kind of interesting, although this isn't the type of deck that you would want to play with League Explorer, which is a fantastic enabler for Rocket Blaster. You do get Ulixa Unspoken Terror if you go into 3 factions, but I've already told you how much I'm not really a fan of 3 factions in this format. But that one is really good with the moon. Just pay 3, kill something. So, yeah. I think that this deck might be good, but you'd really have to find out the right build of it. You have to be able to manage the power base as well as ways of finding Waxing Moon, making sure that you have it for all these synergies that you have. Because once you have it, you can do some cool stuff. Finally, the last deck on my list here is Tradition Ramp. This just goes to show you how powerful Davia is. I've seen people ramping with time cards to get to Davia, like expand the reach. And there's a new, I forgot to talk about it, but I guess I'll talk about it here. Quick section on the new promo. Direwolf just released a new promotional card today, which means that if you get your first copy on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is when you'll finally have 4 copies. And this is a new beginning, 4-cost time justice card. Play a random sigil from your deck depleted, then draw a card. If it's a power card, create and draw a copy of a new beginning. And it's like Plea for Aid or Call for Aid. I forget what the exact name of it is, but the one that gives you a power stone, draws you a card and gains you 1 life. This is pretty similar. You get a random sigil, so you can't dictate what your influence gain will be, and you get to draw a card. You do get this back if you draw a power card, but I don't think that's worth counting on it. I think this can build into the Davia Tradition Ramp deck because you can imagine playing Expand the Reach, then New Beginning, then Davia. I guess that would be turn 5. And Davia is just so powerful that, maybe that's good enough. You get to draw another card. You have to have other things that you're planning on doing with all that power. Like I've mentioned, Valiant Guardian. It's a really good card, but it dies to Ambitious Mandevilla really easily. So I don't know if that's good enough, but maybe there are matchups where that is the type of thing that you want to do. So I think there are some legs there. You'll have to figure out how to use time and justice in order to survive, because it's not necessarily going to be the easiest thing. But yeah, I mean, a ramp deck. The deck that I played against that had this was also playing Bastion Garrison, the one that gives your soldiers +1/+1. Then, since it had a lot of power, you got to amplify a bunch. Like you would just play the powers that amplify, and that would give you soldiers. So that was an interesting strategy. I was on Feln control, so it was definitely difficult to keep up with it. But I mean, again, 3 factions taking turn 3 off in order to ramp might have a lot of trouble with the aggro decks, especially since you're not playing the Shadow Sweeper. And as I'm pretty sure there's no harsh rule or Justice Sweeper in this format, at least not one that doesn't cost 8 or something. So that's an idea, and it just goes to show you how powerful Davia is. Basically, Feln is the best Davia deck, and Davia is just so incredibly powerful that it can win you the games on its own. But this might be another way to play a Davia deck that kind of attacks in a different angle. And it's probably pretty difficult to deal with if you're playing control, just because you have so much power, you have a lot of amplify, you have a lot of time to just sit back and generate value. All right, so those are all the lists that I have on my radar, and hopefully that will represent a large portion of what you might play against this weekend. So finally, let's go into this last section of counterplay to the big pieces of the format. So number 1 is Davia. We need to talk about how you might be able to deal with it. Well, you might be able to play Stayer's Eyes and get a Educator's Gavel. If they play Evolving Ulziol on it, then it looks really embarrassing. But it does make it more difficult for Feln decks because they rely on Davia and on Sinister Rumors to access their Void. Ideally, you don't just jam it on turn 2 because they're not accessing their Void that early, and cards early on in the game are more valuable than cards later on in the game. So it's kind of a sketchy solution, but it is one that, might carry a little bit of weight. The other way is Ulixa, which I think is completely unreliable because if your opponent hasn't drawn Davia yet, Ulixa doesn't do much. But if they have, it actually does really well. It makes Davia and maybe Fall to Ruin or something in their Void not work well at all. I mean, it also shuts off Fall to Ruin in their hands too. But anyway, so that might be a way to counterplay Davia. There's also Exploit. It's probably just better than Ulixa, honestly. Just take it out of their hand. And None of these methods are really that great. Like really the answer is to kill them before they get to 7 and can stabilize. But it's tough. It's tough. And that's why Davia is just so good in this strategy. The second big card that you probably need some counterplay against is Ambitious Mandevilla. And again, this is a card that's difficult to answer. I mean, if you are playing cards like Bubble Shield, which are not in the Expedition format, then Mandevilla is not that great, but there aren't great ways to protect your units from it. It's bigger than most things, so it usually sticks around. And if you use a pump spell to finish it off, well, then you're getting 2 for 1 anyway. So maybe if you use lots of small bodies and you don't have any high priority targets, that might be a way to deal with Mandevilla. But boy, it's tough. Mandevilla is just a great answer, and yeah, that's it. It's just a great answer. It's difficult to really have. Well, okay, you cannot make it worse by playing really high investment cards that just get killed by Mandeville, like sticking an expensive weapon on something, right? The +3/+3 weapon, that's a powerful card. But if you get blown out by Mandevilla, that's a big deal. Or if you're trying to play one of the Scions, I was playing a little bit of Vara Limitless, and when it dies to a Mandevilla, it does not feel good. It does not. So just keep that in mind. That's it's just really powerful removal in the format. All right, the next card on my list, Dovid, of course, in the strategy of soldiers. Cheap removal, Defile works, Permafrost works, Varbrook works really well. But I also question that a Varbrook deck is really what you want to be doing against soldiers. I don't know that it would line up that great because they are going to have the lifesteal. Those are ways of answering Dovid, but boy, even with those, Dovid is a menace for sure. Finally, the last one on my list is Houndmaster, and this one is pretty much just removal. No specific cards. If your opponent's playing a Houndmaster deck, it's probably the last card they're going to play in their hand and then get the 4/4. So if you can keep the board clear, then and they just don't have 2 units to attack with, that's probably the best way to deal with Houndmaster. Once they start making the hounds, it's probably too late. If your opponent gets to make 2 hounds with a single Houndmaster, you're in for a lot of trouble. So make sure that doesn't happen. Try to nip the problem in the bud. Get rid of their units that they might be able to attack with before they can do anything with it. All right, and that's it. I mean, that's the information I can give you that will hopefully help you with Expedition this next weekend. I can't be sure what I'm playing. I've played a lot of Soldiers and Feln lately, and I've liked both of those decks. I don't know how Feln is going to hold up to more tuned versions of opposing decks, and I don't know how well Soldiers is going to run over basically decks that are more tuned. I don't know how well my versions of those decks are going to work against that, but I probably think that I'm going to be playing one of those. Oh, there's one more thing. This is actually really big. I'm glad I remembered it about this weekend's tournaments is that the TNE on Friday, it's the same format as the Open, and the deck lists that people use in it will be available prior to the tournament, and that might influence what gets played. So it's a really interesting dynamic in that some people might not be bringing their best deck to the TNE because they don't want people to know about it, but there will definitely be people that are trying to win the TNE and bringing, whatever their best creation is for that. So it'll be really interesting to take a look at the results from the tournament, and use that to help influence what you play at the Open. Maybe there's a big surprise. Maybe there's a deck that's just really good and I haven't thought of it yet. Someone brings it to the TNE, and then that's the deck to play for the Open. So also kind of weird because the Open starts before the TNE, but there's plenty of time after the TNE in order to pick up a deck and play it for the Open. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic. The best advice I can say is stay tuned to the TNE in order to make sure that you are up to date with what everyone else is doing. One last time, both the TNE and the Open start on July 30th, which is going to be probably tomorrow if you're listening to this podcast the day it comes out, that or it has started already. And there will be another TNE after the fact on Tuesday, August 3rd. That'll be after we see who qualifies for Worlds at the Open, and yeah, I'm looking forward to a really exciting weekend of playing Eternal. Of course, FECast is made possible by our generous patrons at patreon.com. If you'd like to be like one of these lovely people and help keep the cast going, you you can go to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. So huge thank you to Telmokos, Odzos, Prewibin, Cotillion, Alcide Bava, Work Done Son, Chamomile, Chrissier, D-Dub, and Yeastad for their continued support of FECast. Some of them have been with us for an entire year or more, and we just couldn't do it without them. So thank you very much to them. And finally, one big thank you to SRFS, who edits FECast and puts it out and makes sure that everyone gets it in a timely manner. I cannot overstate how much work they do for the cast. Anyway, that is all for today. Thank you for listening. Good luck out there if you are playing in one of the tournaments this weekend. And until next time, we will see you in the friend zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the Friend Zone.